Hi, Chris Fontecchio with the Podium Cafe here. By now you've heard that Lance Armstrong, the former 7-time Tour de France winner, has confessed in an interview with Oprah Winfrey that's scheduled to air in 2 parts on Thursday and Friday night this week. Let's take a quick look into some of the interesting aspects of Lance Armstrong's confession and what does it all mean? First of all, why is this happening? Why is this happening now? Lance has had years and years of accusations against him and opportunities to confess. The reasons he's doing this, only Lance knows for sure, and everybody else is speculating. But in the wake of the USADA's very detailed report and very damning report that has convinced most cycling fans that Lance Armstrong was, in fact, not only taking performance-enhancing drugs during his Tour de France victories, but was orchestrating a team-wide effort to do so, very few people are left really believing in him now. So, part of the result of the USADA's decision is that he's banned from competing in triathlons right now, and there's been a lot of reporting and some very detailed discussions about how Lance Armstrong has sought to get back into triathlons. So, one reason he might be confessing now is that a confession might actually reduce his indefinite ban and allow him to compete in the sport at some point. Another possible reason for this is that maybe he just wants to move on with parts of his life at least. He's already apologized to the Livestrong Foundation, the cancer patient advocacy charity he started and headed for years until they booted him from the ranks a couple months ago. It's reasonable to believe that relationship has a lot of personal meaning to him, and confessing might help mend some of the wounds involved there. There was actually a very interesting report by Neil Rogers of Velo News this morning on ESPN Radio. Neil suggested that actually confessing gives Lance back some control over his story. Lance has always been very famously controlling over everything around him. And strangely enough, his failure to confess and fight all the charges over all these years that he took performance-enhancing drugs has resulted in the USADA report, which deprived him of all control of his life story. Now everybody talks about Lance through the spectrum of the USADA report. So perhaps confessing will actually get him a measure of control back over his own story. Why has it taken so long? Well, the number one reason is money. Here are a few examples of why Lance has had some pretty strong disincentives to confess prior to now. A company called SCA Promotions paid Lance $7.5 million in a 2006 lawsuit settlement over win bonuses from an insurance contract. And confessing will likely fuel their desire to recoup those payments that they were forced to make. But those payments were made as part of a settlement agreement from their original claims against Armstrong for cheating. And a settlement agreement isn't the kind of thing you can lightly walk away from. The terms of the settlement agreement will say whether or not there's a possibility of reopening it, and more often than not, the likely answer is you can't. Another example, maybe the biggest disincentive of all for Lance. The Wall Street Journal is reporting that the U.S. Justice Department is said to be thinking about joining former Postal teammate Floyd Landis's whistleblower suit against the U.S. Postal team for violating the False Claims Act, basically for cheating the government out of money. In this case, by taking the U.S. Postal Service's sponsorship dollars while swearing in their contracts that they were racing clean. False Claims Act suits award treble damages, and the total sponsorship of the U.S. Postal Service was $30 million, meaning as much as $90 million is at stake in that litigation. But probably much less of that could come from Lance himself in the worst case scenario, and Armstrong is supposedly looking to settle. There are other problems facing Armstrong, such as prize money that the Tour de France will want back, and you never know what other lawsuits out there might be brewing. But the question is, does confessing actually make anything worse for him? If a jury in one of these lawsuits was already going to believe the very convincing USADA report and all the witnesses, and felt antagonized by Armstrong's continued denials, that's probably worse for Lance than having confessed. If they were going to rule against him anyway, maybe some aspect of the legal system will go lighter on him now that he's admitted what he did. Can he afford all of this? Up to a point, yes. His fortune is estimated to be about $125 million, the lion's share of which was from sponsors such as Nike and Anheuser-Busch, companies who are more likely to just walk away from Armstrong rather than to try and get their money back. It's possible Lance is hearing about potential litigation from old sponsors, and maybe that litigation becomes less likely if he publicly confesses and apologizes. Another question is, was he going to have to confess anyway? His manager, Johan Brunel, from the U.S. Postal Service, is facing his own charges from the USADA for having facilitated the doping that took place on the team, and he's asked for arbitration to continue to fight those charges. There is no hearing date set for Brunel's arbitration case yet, but it's likely to come up sometime this spring. And in that case, the USADA could have compelled Armstrong to testify. So, if Lance is forced to testify in court, he's got two choices. He can perjure himself, which is pretty much always the worst possible idea, or he could confess in court to the USADA to his old nemesis, Travis Tigert. I'm thinking, compared to that, confessing to Oprah Winfrey looks like a pretty good idea. So, all told, maybe things just can't get any worse, so he might as well confess. Are there any winners and losers in this? I think it's probably safe to say that there will be. First of all, there's Floyd Landis, his old teammate, who has been wandering in the wilderness for quite some time, and his whistleblower lawsuit wasn't taken very seriously when it was originally filed, but now it's looking pretty good. There's Oprah Winfrey, the talk show host, who is about to show whether or not she can handle much meatier subjects than daytime TV. She actually came up through the news business, so my guess is she winds up doing pretty well. There's Travis Tigert, the lead USADA investigator, who not only can tell people accusing him of a witch hunt to shut up, but who also played Armstrong and his legal team like a fiddle. They stonewalled him and dared him to act. He did, and Lance's entire empire came crumbling down. Don't mess with Travis Tigert. There's the sport of cycling, which gets to move on from this whole mess to some degree, and to say that for all of its problems, at least they got public enemy number one. As for some of the losers in all of this, Johan Brunel, the last holdout always gets the worst of it, and let's just say that his fight against the USADA is not looking like it's going to end very well. My guess, just a wild guess, is that you'll see Brunel seek some sort of settlement here fairly soon, but you never know. There's the International Cycling Union, the UCI, the governing body of the sport. They stand to be the biggest losers in Lance's decision to finally confess, because one of the biggest revelations beyond what we already knew is the suggestion reported in the New York Times today that Armstrong is planning to testify against high-ranking officials in the UCI who knew what he was up to and who protected him. For a lot of cycling fans, and perhaps many riders and team managers as well, this has the potential to really shake up the sport and tear down a roadblock in the fight against doping. For a lot of fans, people are really looking for the Armstrong story to maybe go away. It's been hanging around for a long time, but this is the one aspect of it that I think people feel differently about and are looking forward to seeing this pursued. Finally, there's Lance himself. His life might improve some after this, but for almost all the commentators and probably an awful lot of his former fans, we won't forget all the people whose lives he's deliberately trashed over the years. He may redeem his triathlon career, but he'll never be forgiven in the cycling world. Well, that's it for the Armstrong affair at this point. There's less than 6 weeks before the first of the spring classics, so join us at the Podium Cafe as we get back to what the sport of cycling is really all about. And come take part in the FSA Directeur Sportif, the world's best fantasy cycling game. See you later.